3. Just count to 3, I said, under my breath as another blow was dealt to the door in front of me. I backed up, slowly, only to be greeted by a wall not 2 steps behind me. 1, 2. My thoughts were cut by another slam from the door, this time in quick succession with another. I looked up to the single yellow light in the ceiling, dust drifting down and dancing in the cold air. 3. That's all it takes, just like I told her. The girl I met when all this started. We ran into a convenience store on the street and locked eyes. It didn't take long before we both ran to the back of the store to escape them. Once they saw you, it was over. Get out. Get out of sight, I kept saying, just loud enough for both of us to hear as we met in the storage area. There was no time for meetings, to know names. We had to move. We looked around, panic-stricken as we heard the glass door in the front shatter. The girl almost screamed, but held it back just slightly. I stared in the direction we came, uttering, "Shit, shit, shit." "Over there." She pointed to a ladder near the door we entered, leading to the roof. We both ran to it. I helped her up to get to the roof faster, pausing to look through the glass portion of the back room doors. I saw one, covered in blood. Its own or someone else's, I'm not sure. It looked at me with the one eye it had left, the other half of its face mauled and destroyed. Something had tried to fight it and lost. It howled and charged for me. I scrambled to the ladder and leapt upward. She had just opened the latch to the roof now as I pulled myself up with incredible speed, despite my shaking hands. I could hear it clawing behind me, but unable to climb effectively in its blind rage. We closed the door behind us and quickly looked around. It didn't look like anyone else had been up here yet, but all around were the screams of innocence, car alarms, and animalistic howls of the things hunting for flesh. Acrid smoke billowed down streets from cars and out of building windows. Among the chaos, we found one small sanctuary. It was short-lived. We heard a scream nearby. Through a window on a neighboring building, we could see them streaming into a room where a barricade had failed. A man swung at them, but was soon overtaken. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't keep my eyes away from the scene. A woman reached for a window and threw it open, trying to escape. "Hey!" the girl yelled out. "Jump here!" It looked too far, but just maybe she could jump to the rooftop here where it was safe. She looked to us with a glimmer of hope on her face and reached to the outside of the windowsill. She braced herself for a jump as we ran to the edge of the roof to help catch her. "Come on," I encouraged her, when she turned to look back. Within moments, an arm wrapped around her torso and a mouth around her neck. She reared back, screaming in agony as she was pulled back into the room. We both backed up, as we could see more of them entering the room to join the kill. The woman's screams were deafened by their howls. One stood and gazed upon us. It was the man who was killed in the room just a few moments ago. It didn't take long for them to come back and turn on us. We watched in disbelief as it ran and vaulted out the window, reaching out to us with gore-covered hands, hungry for the next meal. He just barely made it, clutching onto the edge of the building. She backed up and I ran forward, trying to stomp its hands and make it fall. We can't lose this small sanctuary just yet. But it held on against my blows, slowly pulling itself up against each kick, barely noticing as I broke his nose, almost clear from his blood-smeared face, before she grabbed my shoulders and pulled me back. I stumbled, pausing to look up as another leapt from the window, using the first as leverage to pull itself up quickly. We turned to the opposite direction and ran to the edge of the building, looking for any escape. The roads were littered with cars and debris. A few people ran from their cars and homes, foolish enough to think they could outrun them or beg for mercy. A gunshot, just below us. We looked down and saw a police officer with his gun drawn. He had just dispatched one of them. Next to him was a wrecked van, just close enough for us to jump down to. If there was any form of nearby safety, this was as good as it was going to get. I looked to her. "We have to jump down. Aim for the top of the van." "It's too far." She cut me off. Both of us looked back as more of them leapt from the window, creating a human ledge as others finally made it to the rooftop. "We have to. We'll jump together on the count of 3. 1. I took her arm in mine. 2. The howling death almost upon us now. 3. We jumped, landing on the roof of the van. I fell to the side as it dented under our combined weight. The wind knocked out of me. I tried to push myself up, only to see the barrel of a revolver to my head as the officer looked at me in disbelief. He stared at me and hesitated, and then reached down to pull me up. "Where the hell did you come from?" he stuttered, lifting me to my feet. "The girl. Where is she?" I looked around and saw her slowly rising from the top of the dented van. "Help her," I wheezed out as I gasped for breath, refilling my lungs with the tainted air around us. The officer looked over and reached out for her, helping her down. When it landed on both of them, it jumped as we had, only now it was on top of her. I rose to my feet and moved to help her. The officer had it by the neck, trying to wrestle it off, but it had inhuman determination. Grabbing her shirt with one hand and her hair in the other, it pulled her in and bit down hard on her shoulder. She let out a cry. I froze in shock. I hadn't seen it up close yet. The strips of pulled skin and tissue between its teeth, the blood oozing out of the gaping wound and dripping down its chin as it opened wide, readying itself for another bite. Another gunshot. At point blank, the officer hollowed out the thing's head as brain and gore sprayed out the other side. It collapsed and was finally still. I shakily walked up, helping the officer to pick her up. Tears streamed down her face. She grit her teeth down in pain, but there was no time to stop. Another had landed on top of the van and grinned at us eagerly, awaiting its turn to feed. The officer wasted no time and raised the barrel to the horizon, the revolver responding in kind with another well-aimed torpedo to the thing's eye, caving in the head almost instantly. We returned to the street, running in between cars looking for any way to escape. "There's a warehouse just over there," the officer said quickly, pointing to a large square building just at the street corner. "It has thick doors and locks. We can hold up there." I didn't question him, and neither did she. We ran, all 3 of us. Just a few more cars to run past now. Soon we could be somewhere safe, I told myself, again and again. I heard a smash as glass shattered near us. One of them had burst from a smashed car through its impacted windshield and began running for us. It was limping from the crash. "Just keep going," I shouted, but she fell suddenly. I almost dropped myself from her tight grasp on me. Her shirt was almost soaked completely in blood. She looked dangerously pale, but still tried to get back on her feet. I helped her up. "I don't feel so good," she said under her breath as she gasped for air. "Just hold on. We're almost there," I reassured her and kept moving. The officer made it to the door first. He yanked it open and ushered us inside. She fell again, this time collapsing completely. I leaned down and tried to pick her up. She was shivering, so slightly. Then more and more as it turned into a seizure like convulsing. I looked in horrified awe as her back arched violently and air escaped her mouth in ravaged breaths. Her eyes went blood red as tears streamed down her face, looking at me, just staring at me, begging for help, to do anything. Just as quickly as it started, it ended. She lay limp in a pool of her own blood. "Get away from her!" the officer shouted at me. I looked back to see his face, horrified and rushed, when his eyes went wide and he aimed his revolver towards me. I was pushed over suddenly. Something was clawing at my back. I turned around, scrambling to get back, to get up, when I saw the thing from the wrecked car climbing to me now, to sink its teeth in and rip my life from me. I reached out to stop it, my hands pushing against its shoulders and neck to keep it at bay. Its pulverized forehead dripping bits of gore from where the steering wheel had impacted its head. Then there was another hand. It grabbed the thing by the scruff of its neck and yanked it up. Point blank again, the officer's revolver silenced the thing with one resounding clap. Everything was fuzzy now, adrenaline rushing through me as I watched it fall in almost slow motion. The officer pulled me up with his other hand. I braced myself and looked up to see another one of them kneeling down next to her body, hunched over her. The officer pulled me back towards the building, but I kept watching as it lurched its head forward and down, releasing a wave of bile and blood over the girl's face and wound. The officer pulled me inside and shut the door with my last glimpse. I could have sworn I saw her blink and look at me again. "That's 2 left. We can't afford any more close calls like that," the officer said grimly, checking the rounds in his revolver. I fastened the door lock on the door and we hurried inside the building, tools and machinery everywhere. "Where do we go now?" I said in a hurried voice, catching my breath, the smell of oil and metal filling my senses. "There was a robbery once here and the workers held up in a big room. It's in here somewhere." His voice was hurried and shaking. There was a banging on the door now. Others had seen us enter and were eager to follow us inside. The officer didn't say a word. We both ran further inside, checking every door we could. Most of them were locked or too weak to hold up in, but one wasn't locked, but also wouldn't swing open as if it were being blocked. But not well enough. "Here we go," the officer grunted as he gave the door a well-placed kick. It budged a little, just enough to give us both hope. He kicked again and again, prying the door open an inch more at a time. There were more sounds down the hall. I could hear them wailing at the door and windows in frustration, keeping them from their prey. I was startled when the officer threw his shoulder against the door in one last effort, breaking something wooden, and we heard it splintering behind the door. We hurried inside. I flipped the light switch in the dark room, but to no avail. The officer pulled a flashlight from his belt and clicked it to life, blanketing the room with a soft white glow. He stopped. There was red on the floor, a few streams coming from the back of the room. A smear, led by a handprint, like something was pushing itself away from the door. When we heard it, a faint groan. The officer raised his light to the source of the sound and saw them. There were 3 of them, a man, woman, and child, all hunched over each other in a heap. We both stared at the sight, their faces bloodied and destroyed, their eyes bloodshot, just like hers were. The officer walked closer, looking at the scene in an almost morbid curiosity. When I saw it, the man and woman, they looked like they had little holes in them, their necks and faces covered in what looked like tiny bite marks. The child lurched suddenly, releasing a tiny spray of bile and gore over its former parents. "Have mercy," the officer almost wept, covering his mouth with his hand. "We gotta get out of here," I whispered, unable to find the strength or will to speak loudly. "Not the little ones, too," the officer said solemnly. The child turned to face us, a gaping maw where his side once was. It looked at the officer, just staring at him for a moment, tilting its head slowly sideways, a small amount of air escaping its tiny mouth, before widening its eyes and shuffling towards him with surprising speed. I reached up to pull the officer back, but he was faster than either of us. He sidestepped the child and tripped it. I saw tears rolling down his cheeks as he picked it up by the back of its tattered and bloodied shirt and gently tossed it back against its heap of parents. Why hadn't they turned yet? I thought to myself. Now that I had a chance, it looked like it had vomited on them many times but was just too small to give them enough. The officer turned and walked out of the room, his eyes not meeting mine. It was returning now, running at us from behind. I hurried behind him and into the hallway. It sounded almost happy as it was biting at our heels when the officer turned and aimed. The shot was so loud, my ears stung. There was a thud and then silence. "How cruel, to be the last one," the officer said quietly. "Now you three can be together again." The officer quickly closed the door behind us. We were both breathing heavily, echoing in the hallway. The officer looked up at me with sadness in his eyes that I could feel, but couldn't completely understand. When glass shattered down the hall and we heard the cries of death upon us again, he looked down the hall, then down at his revolver, then at me, and seated its grip in my hand. "We can't all make it," he said with a certainty that sent shivers down my body. "Wait, hold on," he interrupted me and pushed me back. "I'll hold them off. Get to a room and wait there until help comes." They were coming down the hall now, running at us full speed. "Go!" he screamed and pushed me again. He began running at them full force, howling back with a roar of anger matching their own. His shoulder impacted the first, knocking it clear off its feet and into the wall. He pulled a baton from his belt and extended it with a crack and brought it down against the thing's head, again and again. More were upon him now, gripping at his arm. He batted one away and was holding his own, when one from the ground reached out at his boot, pulling it from under him. He stumbled, and the rest engulfed him like a wave of grasping hands and gnawing teeth. I ran down the hall. I could hear screams as living flesh was stripped from bone. My eyes filled with tears as I ran and ran until I reached the end. There were 3 doors. I checked one frantically. Locked. The second wouldn't budge. I grabbed at the third and it flung open to reveal a janitor's closet. I slammed the wooden door behind me. 3. "Just count to 3, I said just under my breath as another blow was dealt to the door in front of me. I looked down from the light and saw the door cracking from the attacks. The howls came one at a time. Soon there were more, a never-ending tirade of those things calling out for me. My flesh. I held the heavy steel revolver in my hands, shaking terribly, and opened the cylinder. There was 1 round left. The door splintered at one of the hinges. I breathed quickly and sharply, sweat dripping down my face and stinging my eyes, my hands slippery with anticipation of the doom that awaited just moments away. I locked the cylinder back into place. 1, I said out loud. I raised its loaded, heavy barrel to my temple. 2, I said, shaking now almost uncontrollably. The door was bending inwards now. I could see fingers and soon hands reaching through the splintered opening. I backed up, completely against the wall, sobbing and squeezing my eyes closed as hard as I could, screaming out as the door gave way under the relentless force. 3.